Welcome back, everyone. As John was saying, we are going to continue with this exploration, looking into what I call the yoga of theosophy. The word yoga today is sometimes associated just to the physical exercises aspect of yoga, what is called hatha yoga. But yoga is also a spiritual path in itself, a system of yoga. And in the Theosophical tradition, the word yoga has been used since Blavatsky's times in a way that is connected to the spiritual practice. Way before, I think Blavatsky was probably the first person to bring up the word yoga in the West in a popular way, outside the small circle of scholars. And the idea here is, last evening in our last talk, we said that the purpose of the Theosophical Society is to try to promote a spiritual regeneration in people, which means that the essential mission is an action mission. It's not just about learning about ideas, it's about doing something. And I think that is connected to the following quote from a master of wisdom. We don't know who. Blavatsky published an article that she said this comes from a master of wisdom. And he or she, there are some masters that are embodied in female bodies. Most of them did not participate in the public work that we know about. But Blavatsky and other theosophists said, yeah, the masters and every one of us are far beyond gender. And in what gender a master incarnates, it depends on the work that they have to do. So anyway, there is a master of wisdom that wrote this, and let's say he, in general, said, the problem of true theosophy and its great mission are, first, the working out of clear, unequivocal, so clear and precise, let's say, conceptions of ethics, ideas, and duties, such as shall best and most fully satisfy the right and altruistic feelings in people. So he's saying the first, the great mission of theosophy is first to work out of the teachings an ethical system that will satisfy our highest aspirations. And then he continues, and second, the modeling of these conceptions for their adaptation into such forms of daily life as shall offer a field where they may be applied with most equitableness. So first, develop this universal ethic out of the teachings, and then show how they can be lived, how they can be applied. So the master is saying here, this is the problem of true theosophy. And I think this is our mission. When we read all this esoteric philosophy, what the masters of wisdom are giving us are these universal principles, and our mission is to bring those principles into a universal ethics, meaning an ethics that is not based on the values of the current society or culture, but values that have to do with universal truths, and then to show how to apply these principles in our daily life. And then he continues, such is the common work placed before all who are willing to act on these principles. It is a laborious task and will require strenuous and persevering exertion, but it must lead you insensibly to progress and leave you no room for any selfish aspirations outside the limits traced. So applying this in daily life is not easy, but gradually it fills your whole life and doesn't leave room for all the natural selfish tendencies that we grow up and acquire in our growing up in our cultures. And something similar to this that Blavatsky said, teach, practice, and promulgate that system of life and thought which alone can save the coming races. She's talking about the sub-races and root races and not ethnicity, so the future humanity, let's say. So teach, practice, and promulgate that system of life. You see, she's talking about theosophy as a system of life, not as a philosophy. System of life and thought, which alone can save the coming humanity. We'll talk about this idea of the coming humanity in the last talk this evening. So what I want to present to you is, I excerpted some of the main fields of theosophical work in connection to the practice that I've identified. I'm sure there are many more, so this is to stimulate you to look for your own system of practice. So what I'm going to present is a yoga of theosophy based on theosophical teachings. And I think that the first important point is to look at the goal of this system of practice. In most religions, the purpose of the spiritual life is to be saved or to attain liberation or nirvana. And in general, it's a kind of individual path. You are seeking for your own liberation. Of course, the bodhisattva ideal that Huli mentioned in Tibetan Buddhism has this idea of a collective endeavor. And this is part of how the Theosophical tradition looks at the spiritual practice. So Blavatsky said, true occultism is the destruction of the false idea of self, of separate self. And therefore, true spiritual perfection and knowledge are nothing else but the complete identification of our finite selves with the great all. So the complete identification of our separate center of consciousness with the one all, with the unity, with the totality. It follows, therefore, that no spiritual progress at all is possible except by and through the bulk of humanity. It is only when the whole of humanity has attained happiness that the individual can hope to become permanently happy, for the individual is an inseparable part of the whole. So basically, she's saying here, there is no possibility of ultimate permanent happiness for any unit of humanity until the whole of humanity has attained that state. In a sense, you could think of you as a parent, a loving parent with children and people who depend on you, and then somebody comes and gives you the opportunity to go to retire in a beautiful beach with everything you want. And sure, that can be perfect and beautiful, but if you know that your children back home are suffering, can your happiness be complete or real, or to what extent? So many of these enlightened beings, sure, they could rest in union with the whole, but there seems to be this awareness, this connection to the other manifestations of yourself, because at least in the Theosophical tradition, when you realize this unity, you realize that every human being is a single expression of yourself. Not of yourself as a separate self. It's not that humanity is an expression of Pablo. Pablo and the whole of humanity are an expression of myself, which is yourself, your true self. So Blavatsky says, in this approach, there cannot be complete happiness until the whole of humanity is liberated or attains to happiness. And this is why these enlightened beings that we call the masters of wisdom remain kind of in touch with humanity, helping the evolution of humanity out of love. And, in Buddhism, they call it compassion. In early translations of Buddhism, they would use the word pity. Huli had a quote where it said, pity for all. Then the word compassion was chosen, but the real, like the Sanskrit and Pali words, imply more than the regular kind of compassion that we normally think of. Anyway, so connected to that, Blavatsky says, followed with a selfish aim, as many times spiritual practices are, Theosophy changes its nature and becomes demonosophy. Theosophy is the wisdom of God, demonosophy, the wisdom of demons. That is why Oriental wisdom teaches us that the Hindu yogi who isolates himself in an impenetrable forest, like the Christian hermit who, as was common in former times, retires to the desert, are both of them but accomplished egoists. Their motive is altogether personal. HPV said this many times, and of course when you are trying to make a point, you tend to be more radical than what you really think of, because otherwise the message is not clear. And there are many people who may retire from the world with an altruistic intention. Even the Buddha did that, although then when he attained enlightenment, they came back to the world. So the idea here, what she's denouncing, are these people that retire from the world just to pursue their own liberation. And I remember reading from Nisargadatta Maharaj. He was a sage in India. And he said, the ambition of some yogis is far greater than the ambition of any of your greatest materialistic people. Because if you pursue the spiritual path just with that intention, you are still accentuating the idea that you are an individual. And that's why Theosophy says this is not going to lead you far. Actually, Annie Besant later got into details. She said, there is a kind of fake liberation when you pursue a spiritual path in a selfish way and you try to cut off all desires about the world and all that. When you die, because you don't have desires that bring you back into reincarnation, yes, you are freed from the cycle of rebirths, but then you are in a state that is like a long devachan. Devachan is a technical term that we use in Theosophy for a state after death, in which it's a pleasant state. But she said these people stay there, like they can stay there for hundreds of thousands of years, but there is no progress there. So when the whole of humanity and the world continue to evolve, at some point these souls are dragged back into reincarnation when conditions change and the new objects of desire are developed that this soul did not get rid of, let's say. It's very complicated. I'm trying to make it simple. Then these souls are dragged back, and then they have to continue their evolution, but all that time they kind of wasted. So they come back to the point where they were before, when the whole of humanity had continued to evolve. So I don't know, all these things, we can't say whether that is true or not, but I think the idea is that you can attain some isolated states of happiness that are not permanent if you are seeking for this individually. If you want the real thing, you need to take the totality into account. And that's the Theosophical point of view, at least. So let's look at the different elements of this yoga of Theosophy. As we have seen when we talked about the evolution of ideas and all that, the study or spiritual study of spiritual teachings, let's say, is very important. And this is the case also in Eastern traditions. I mean, there is a strong discipline of study in all the Buddhist schools. In Hindu schools also, you have normally the study, the listening, which is the part of study because originally they would listen for hear the teachings from a guru, then the reflection, then the meditation. But the listening, the learning is always the foundation of the spiritual path. In this age, we are generating a technology, a spiritual technology, a collection of techniques that we think, I don't need anything else, just tell me how to breathe, how to sit, what mantra to repeat, and then I'll attain enlightenment. And we have as a culture what I think is a very fractioned idea of spirituality, and that's why it doesn't work. But in most traditions, spiritual study is the first step. So Radha Burnier, a former president of the society, said, we do not know what is our own good because our view is short-sighted. We have a wrong idea of ourselves, a lack of perspective in respect of our own lives. Theosophy provides the needed perspective. Unless a person knows what he is, what his future must be, in what direction he must move, how can he do the right thing? So this is the first aim of spiritual study, to give you a worldview that can guide you to be successful, let's say, in a field that is completely different from daily life, the regular activity. We are trained to be successful in the world, through our study and education and family, and all of that is training us to get a job and be as good as possible in that job. But all that worldview can be great to produce the technological advance that we are seeing, but look at how the world is. Obviously, that worldview is not helping the world to be happy, peaceful, harmonious, tolerant. So the spiritual study is to give you a different worldview, a different pattern and aims of life that is geared toward producing that inner development. And if we let go of that, then we will approach spirituality in a materialistic way, which again, we can see this everywhere. The ego has this ability to co-opt everything and turn it for its own aims and desires. And we see it everywhere with meditation as a form of self-satisfaction, with the development of powers as a form, again, of self-aggrandizement. What Janet was showing about this idea of the egregores and using that to create a successful business. Again, it's not that it's intrinsically bad to do that, but see what humanity does. Oh, this is valuable. Then it's valuable for my material self. And that's what we are constantly doing. So the theosophical perspective is always trying to keep or bring our eyes out of the, of the physical so that we can see the whole. Not that we deny the physical, but so that we can see the whole and understand the physical from this broader perspective. So then there is the idea that the root problem of humanity is spiritual ignorance, therefore spiritual wisdom is the remedy. So Jeffrey Hodgson says, the cause and error of all suffering is ignorance, the cure is knowledge. Now, when we say ignorance and knowledge, we are not talking about regular knowledge. We are talking about spiritual perception, leading to realization. Theosophy reveals the plan of life, thereby bestowing mental serenity upon those who study it and making intelligent and purposeful living possible for them. So in this world that there is so much chaos, the more you understand life from a spiritual point of view, the less disturbed you are in the world. Not that you become insensitive, but it does bestow mental serenity because you start looking at things from a far wider point of view. And the worst thing that can happen in life to any human being, death, is not a big deal. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive or diminish that, but we are an eternal soul. The death of the body is something that we have gone through so many times. We need to protect life because life has a purpose. But that doesn't mean that death is a curse. On the contrary, life is when you go to work, the soul is sent to work, then you work, Now, suppose that you are in the middle of your work. You work in a factory that is really hard, but you forget that there is any life other than that. So 5 p.m. comes, and then you are still clinging to the machines because you are thinking that you are going to disappear when you walk out of the factory. And then you walk out of the factory, and then you are with your family, and you can enjoy life, and you can do different things. The same with physical life. We come here to do work, spiritual work. And when life comes, and when death comes, that's your vacation, that's your liberation, that's the end of suffering. That's coming back home. There is this saying, the human beings laugh when there is a birth and cry when there is death. Angels cry when there is a birth and laugh when there is death. From that point of view. Anyway, so the idea is that understanding life from a different perspective gives you serenity, allows you to live in this world without being, so anxious. Annie Besant said, the object, you must remember, of all our teachings is not to give facts to memorize, as is done in the case of ordinary knowledge, but to evolve in yourself the faculties which will enable you to understand and grasp facts, spiritual facts in this case, and arrange them in their proper place. So basically, we are not studying to work with ideas, but to be able to grasp the facts of life and understand them properly. And for that, we need to develop a faculty, the higher mind. So the purpose of the study is to develop the ability to grasp the facts of life, and understand them in the proper way, in the proper proportion. Like the example that I was given about life and death. And the last thing about study that I want to bring up, Annie Besant says, there is another point we must not forget. Concrete thought finds its natural realization in action. And if you do not act out a thought, then by reaction you weaken the thought. Strenuous action along the life of thinking must follow the thought, otherwise progress will be slow. This is, I think, an intrinsic problem in all spiritual traditions. When we talk about these things, the purpose of these teachings is to inspire you, is to produce a call to action. And perhaps the first time that we hear these things, it produces that effect. But then, if we stay at that level, we keep hearing that and repeat that and give talks about that with no intention of molding, shaping our life by those principles. And then, eventually, we make them irrelevant. And then they lose the power to transform. So as Annie Besant says here, if you don't try to apply these ideas, that will weaken the ideas. And then you have all this ideology that has no power to shape your life because you have made them irrelevant because you have not applied them. This is what happens to all of us. So it is important to have this balance. It's not just about accumulating information. It's about seeing how you can shape your life to the extent that is possible. I mean, the ideals in Theosophy are so high that you can't expect to be able to embody that perfectly. If you do, then you would be liberated. So you use that as a faraway, aim toward which you try to get closer and closer in your daily life as the years go by. If you are trying to apply that, then they become a very powerful force in your life. But if we don't, then they lose their strength and they become irrelevant.
I'm intrigued by the very beginning of your talk with regards the emphasis on not making a spiritual practice selfish and materialistic, and that it's not just for us, but it's for everyone, and the emphasis, and this is the theme of the Bodhisattva ideal. But I feel that very sentiment is based on the wrong view of the separation of the self itself. Because if really if the individual is the whole, if the individual becomes enlightened,
that will benefit the whole.
well, is there really if there is no separation, which of course begs the question of, like the practice of the Buddha. I mean, he practiced to become enlightened. He was enlightened. Not everybody was enlightened from our perspective, but maybe from the enlightened person's perspective, as Nisargadatta pointed out. There's no difference between you and me, but you just don't know it.
Yes, absolutely.
So could you comment on that, please?
Yes. That's a good point. I think this idea is because that is the reality. On the highest plane, we are all the divine, and the only difference is that some people know it, some people don't know it. Those who know it don't suffer. Those who do not know it suffer. Now, I think this commandment of, don't follow it selfishly is simply because when you start following the path with the view that you are following your own salvation, that very frame of mind will not allow you to realize that unity. Because you are coming from the point of view, precisely that point of view that is an illusion, that I am a separate individual from the whole. And as long as I'm operating from that point of view, I will never realize that I am the whole. So it is coming from the relative truth. As long as you think that you are a separate individual, do not approach the spiritual path from that point of view, because then there will be a practical limit to what you can do. So yes, it's based on that illusion because we are operating from that illusion.
So we're talking about, you're mentioning spiritual wisdom, spiritual awakening. For those who in this life, in this mortal life, do not become awakened, is there necessarily bliss in the afterlife, or is it more suffering in the afterlife? Is there a difference if a person is awakened in this life versus remaining ignorant? Does that affect their afterlife state? Is there bliss in the afterlife? Is there torment, suffering in the afterlife?
Yeah, that's a whole subject in itself, but in the Theosophical tradition, yes, you don't need to be perfect to experience bliss in the afterlife. There will be as much bliss as love was in your heart, let's say. And there will be as much suffering, but not in the way of hell, but there will be suffering to the degree of the attachment that you had to objects that now you don't have access to, let's say. And if you, coming back to what John said, let's see if this one works. Now, of course, if you start the spiritual path from the non-dual point of view, well, you are doing this. You are not working for yourself because you realize you are the whole. So yes, that would work. This is, for those typically in religions, they tell you have to attain your own salvation. The non-dual path is the same as what Theosophy is proposing there.
Yeah, the point that's on the screen right now about the importance of concrete thought finding its natural realization in action, it reminds me of something you mentioned a couple of weeks ago in one of the online lectures where you were mentioning theurgy and iamblichus, and that one of the principles of that line of thought had to do with the importance of taking the principles and making an action, however small, by way of bringing it down to the physical plane. And I just wonder if there's more you have to say about that.
Yeah, no, that it's always a little tricky to bring things to the physical plane. Sometimes in that process we drag out something that is spiritual and turn it into something that is material. But if you do it in the right way, yes, that's what we need to do, to bring those spiritual principles and apply them to our daily life. I remember when I was a teenager or so, and I read this book by Deepak Chopra on the laws of success or something like that. So he starts the book saying, yes, we are spirits and there is abundance. If I remember correctly, I may be misquoting, this was many years ago, but this is the impression that I got. We are spirits and there is abundance and everything we need is in the spirit. And then the next step is how to bring all that to satisfy your material desires. And that's the reversion there. Wait a second, if everything we need is in the spirit, shouldn't we go to the spirit or realize the spirit, and that will make us happy, instead of trying to drag that which is supposed to be abundance to satisfy the lower, right? So in bringing down to the physical, the spiritual principles, we have to not be materialistic, in that sense. Anyway, let's continue with the next point. So the foundation of the right view is set by the spiritual study, and then we have another important item or action in this yoga, that is what we call purification. Blavatsky said, the power to know, not knowledge, but the power to know, the power to perceive reality, does not come from book study, nor from mere philosophy, but mostly from the actual practice of altruism in deed, word, and thought. Why? Because that practice purifies the covers of the soul and permits that light, the light of the soul, to shine down into the brain-mind. In the Theosophical view, the soul, our soul, is far wiser than what we express in our personality. If we could raise our consciousness to the level of the soul, we would realize we are eternal, we have lived so many lifetimes in the past, we would see the relative, importance of what we experience from this vantage point of view. At the level of the soul, there is not strong feeling of separation, there is harmony, it's a very spiritual state of consciousness. But then when we as a soul incarnate in the body, we are blinded to our true nature because we wake up in a body that is not permanent, that has a lot of needs, that experiences pain, that experiences conflict and competition, and then we are drawn into the reality of the body. So what Blavatsky says here, if we can remove the veil that exists between we as a soul and our physical consciousness, then we would spiritualize our lives. And she says, how do you do that? By living an ethical life, a spiritual life. That is what removes the veil between your true nature and your physical nature. So she continues, as the brain-mind, the mind that operates through the brain, is the receiver of the consciousness that comes from the soul in the waking state, it has to be purified from sense perception. The perception that our senses bring produces a story, it tells you we are all separate. I mean, if instead of seeing light, we would see heat, our boundaries would not be so sharp because the heat, expands, and we would see how we interpenetrate each other. But because we see light, we see this sharp separation. The brain evolved in this way. Scientists now say the brain is not designed to bring you the right view of reality. It brings you an icon of what reality is, which is designed not to see, to see the ultimate truth. It's designed to preserve your body. You want to know that the lion that is out there is different from you, so that you can run away from the lion. Your brain has evolved to preserve your body, and is geared or is programmed to see threats, to see separation, to see competition. So this is the sense perception that underlies our decision-making, our actions, our understanding of ourselves. So Blavatsky says we need to purify our consciousness from that sense perception and allow the spiritual perception to replace it. So she says it has to be purified from sense perception, and the truest way to do this is by combining philosophy, that's the study, with the highest outward and inward virtue. So the two things, spiritual living with the right understanding of life. Then Jeffrey Hodgson would said, any expansion of consciousness is valueless unless the personal vehicles of thought, feeling, and action are sufficiently refined to receive and express its results. These laws may be summed up as the purification of thought, refinement of feeling, and control of bodily conduct. So there are two aspects to human beings, consciousness and matter, or consciousness and body, let's say, spirit and matter. So there are some actions that expand our consciousness. But then that expansion has to be expressed through our bodies, mental body, emotional body, physical body. And those are part of the veils that Blavatsky was talking about. So if our bodies are not able to reproduce those spiritual perceptions, then those spiritual perceptions are lost and don't have the ability to affect our physical actions, our waking life. So in the Theosophical tradition, there is a strong emphasis on purifying our thoughts, our emotions, even our body, so that we can receive that expansion of consciousness and retain it. Many times in lectures or in studies, you have an insight. What happens to that insight? Is it retained? Is your conduct after that shaped by that insight, which at the moment you saw as true? You say, yes, this is this way. But then we tend to go back to the old ways. One of the problems is that our vehicles cannot retain that insight, so it's gradually lost. And as we purify our thoughts, emotions, and body, they become more receptive and they can be imprinted, let's say, by these insights, so that they begin to shape the new self in us. And then briefly, there are many teachings on how to purify our thoughts, emotions, actions. There are techniques, strategies. I can't go into that. But the basic principles here, how shall you purify the thought body or the mental body? By right thinking. And then the astral or emotional body is purified by right desire. Desire nobly, and the astral body will evolve the organs of good desires instead of the organs of evil ones. Good and evil in a philosophical sense, not Satan and all that. The secret of all progress is to think and desire the highest that you can conceive of. Make your ideal. Try to love that ideal. Try to follow it. Try to express it. Explore it. And as you work with that, that is what begins to purify your bodies. So the secret of all progress is to think and desire the highest, never dwelling on the fault, the weakness, the error, but always on the perfected power. So this is also part of the Theosophical technique. So just the way to get rid of what is wrong is not by getting entangled and fighting with it and feeling guilty about it. No, just focus on strengthening what is good, and then the error will naturally weaken and disappear. This story of the two wolves, I think it's a native story. There are two wolves, black and white, and one is good, one is bad, and then the grandma was telling, the grandchildren there about this story, and who's going to win. They are always in conflict. Who's going to win? And the grandma said, the one that you feed. So we need to feed what is good and then starve out what is an error. So never dwelling on the fault, the weakness, the error, but always on the perfected power. And slowly, in that way, you will be able to build up perfection in yourself. Think and desire then in order to purify the thought body and the astral body. And then there is also the physical body. How shall you purify the physical body? You must regulate it in all its activities, in sleep, in food, in exercise, in everything. Take, for instance, food. All forms of animal the animal kingdom are built up to express animal desires and animal activities. The yogi cannot afford to use this in a body meant for the highest processes of thought. The idea here is that during the animal kingdom, the desire principle is developed. The main activity of the animal kingdom, from an ant to a tiger or to a dog, or the consciousness there is developing what we call desire and passion and all that. Then, as a human being, we have all that part developed, and then we start developing the mind. So what the energies that are animating animals are a kind of energy that it tends to increase all the passional and desire aspect. So when you build the body with that, you are building it with a matter that has a tendency to respond faster to desires than to spiritual ideals. Now, Blavatsky said, this is not a sin. It's not that you cannot be spiritual if you are not vegetarian. But if you are working on this is part of the help that you can choose to embrace, so that with the purification of the three bodies, you can be more receptive to the spiritual. Now, I have been a vegetarian for 30 years, but I always say, because the food that we eat is more evident than the thoughts and emotions that we have, sometimes people place undue importance on what they eat, and they may think they are spiritual because they are vegetarians, and then they don't pay attention to their emotions and thoughts. So everything in perspective. It's, if you have to choose one thing to purify, I would say purify your thoughts, because the thoughts awaken desires according to those thoughts. So start with your thoughts. If you are inspired and you want to try it, being vegetarian is helpful, but don't take it, blow it out of proportion. Now, there is the other aspect of compassion for animals, and that's also an important aspect of the spiritual life. But again, don't let the physical become more important than what is hidden. All right, so this is about purification. Any comment or thought?
It seems like, all the metaphors you're using are physical. And if you get trapped by these metaphors, you naturally go toward materialism, the thing you're trying to overcome. So...
Can you invent different metaphors? No, I'll start using them. I mean, to purify the bodies.
There are spiritual metaphors like vibration and less physical, less nouns, more verbs, things like that.
I mean, when Besant explains the process of purification, it's all about vibration, and she talks about that. But yeah, I think, the problem is that we only know the physical plane. So when, for example, they talk about the energies on this body, they have to use the word energy, but energy is something physical that we know. Or magnetism, but then magnetism is something physical, or even vibration. So yes, that's an intrinsic problem in communicating. And Besant Leadbeater said this many times. Things on the higher planes cannot really be explained by the words of the lower. So this is all allegorical language, because it's the only language that we have available. So it's important to keep in mind what Ed is saying. This is the way that they can explain it with the words that we know, but it's not a material process in that sense.
When I'm looking at this, it makes me think of Hooley's presentation from yesterday and the qualifications of being a disciple, I believe, of Theosophy, right? And then the number one was that you had to have a physically healthy. And so it led me to wonder, first of all, is that possible today, right? Was it possible then? Is it possible today? But so also, is this how that is to be achieved? So basically going through this purification, which to me, everything just kind of falls in line once you start in a certain place. But so is this how that's achieved? Is that still a requirement? That's kind of what I'm thinking.
So all requirements that you will find in Theosophy are the perfect ideal, where you are going to. If, we could follow the requirements that Juli showed yesterday, that Blavatsky wrote about perfectly, we would be already all Buddhas, right? So what is put in front of us is the perfect human being is this. So how can you get closer than you are today? How can you get closer to that tomorrow and closer to that tomorrow and like that? There have been many spiritual people. I mean, when you are on a spiritual path, there is also a question of the past karma, and illnesses are part of working out karma, and many spiritual people who don't have physical health, perfect physical health. So the idea is that this is where you are going. So yes, how can you make this present body be as healthy as possible? Because we are all born with different bodies, different metabolisms. So this is not a question of comparing my body with another. What I can do with this body is different to what any of you can do. So take your body, and within the limitations of that karma brought to your bodies, what's the best you can do, to move in that direction. And those rules, I think Juli is going to talk about that. But you mentioned a disciple of Theosophy. These rules are for, it's not just for us students of Theosophy. These are very high rules for those who would become disciples of the Masters of Wisdom and initiated. They initiates in a process of initiation that happens on higher planes. It's a very advanced kind of stage, not for the student of Theosophy. But that's our ideal. We don't know when we will get there. For all you know, you may be ready in this lifetime or in the future. We don't know. But yeah, it's talking about a quite advanced stage. Mm-hmm. All right, let's continue, move on to the next point. There is obviously, if we are going to work on ourselves, there is the need to develop awareness of the external and self-awareness. And Blavatsky was talking about, for example, she was saying, kind of allegorically also, so suppose there is a student, he wants to be spiritual, he goes to a teacher, and he expects the teacher to show him or her how to live in the spiritual worlds. And then the student finds that all his attention and watchfulness are required on the outer plane, that the teacher says, no, forget about that. First, are you aware of the physical plane? Are you aware of your actions? If you are not aware of this, you will be living in fantasy only if you try to go to the spiritual plane. So first, the student finds that all his attention and watchfulness are required on the outer plane. He must never forget himself, never lose hold over his body, his mind, his brain. He must even learn to control the expression of every feature, to check the action of each muscle, to be the master of every slightest involuntary movement. The daily life around and within him is pointed out as the object of his study and observation. So instead of forgetting what we usually called the petty trifles, the little forgetfulness, the accidental slips of tongue or memory, he is forced to become each day more conscious of these lapses. So this article is called The Great Paradox and says, this person goes to a teacher to escape the world into the spiritual bliss and finds that the first thing he has to do is to be even more aware of the world and his body and his actions and all of that. And this is because many times spirituality becomes a way of trying to escape the world. And as long as spirituality is a way of escaping the world, it's not true spirituality. We get what we want. We knock and the door will be open. The problem is that our knocking is unconscious. So when you go to spirituality to escape the world, you are going to escape the world, but you are not going to grow spiritually. And so the question is, spirituality has to include the physical life, and the development of awareness is the first step. And then we have, for example, in another book, Light on the Path, regard earnestly all the life that surrounds you. Learn to look intelligently into the hearts of men, but from an absolutely impersonal point of view. Otherwise, your sight is colored. Therefore, impersonality must first be understood. This is the idea, learn about the human nature. Look at how you respond to things. Look at how others respond to things. Not to judge them, but to understand human nature. We all share the same human nature, and many times it's easier to see in somebody else something that you have, but it's difficult to see it in yourself. So when you say that somebody does something that you think is not wise, reflect, in what ways am I doing this? The other is a very interesting mirror when you use it in that way. So every time you see somebody doing something that you think is wrong, think of yourself and say, in what way in the fields that I move am I doing the same? And then Light on the Path continues. Regard more earnestly your own heart, for through your own heart comes the one light which can illuminate life and make it clear to your eyes. So this is self-observation, self-awareness also. Not until the bonds of personality are loosed can that profound mystery of the true self begin to be seen. Not till you stand aside from the personal self. This is the idea of the witness, learning to watch yourself and the world without the entanglement with your feelings, thoughts, actions, or other people's actions. You learn to kind of stand aside from yourself and watching, being aware of everything. So not till you stand aside from the personal self will it in any way reveal itself to your understanding. Then, and not till then, not till you are able to do that, can you grasp and guide the personal self. The trying to reform the personal without having access first to this impersonal understanding will get you constantly entangled with the personal self. So we need to learn this pure, as Krishnamurti would describe it, this kind of witnessing or observation that is not judging, not condemning, not justifying. You just learn what is going on. And then you have the opportunity to guide the personal self. Then, and not till then, can you use all its powers and devote them to a worthy service. Because only then, only through this awareness, you can attain self-mastery, which is the next point. Any comments or questions about this?
I guess I'm feeling very excited for myself because although I've been feeling as if I'm kind of stuck in the physical world, I'm stuck in mud, I'm realizing that that's an important step in this whole process, and that the skills that I'm developing in my physical life now are very similar to the steps that I'm going to need to take later on. So I see myself practicing them now. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to steal a phrase. In the spiritual life, the obstacle is the way. The obstacle is the way, in the sense that physical life is our training ground. Your work may be digging holes, but if you do your work, whatever it is, I have worked, my dad was in construction, so I have worked in that many times. Whatever you do, if you do it with awareness, that's your yoga. If you relate to your boss or to your dependent with awareness, that's your yoga. The daily life is our training ground. So there is no separation between spirituality and daily life. And what you are saying about the skills is actually, it's very perceptive in the sense that there is a story. There was a woman that was for a while a very devoted theosophist, and then I think her husband died, and they had a hotel, and she had to become the manager of the hotel. She could do no spiritual work in her eyes, and she complained to Annie Besant, and she said, I don't know what happened, why I was taking off the spiritual life and working in managing the hotel. And Besant said that she talked to the master, and the master said, she has some skills that we will need for the beginning of the 6th sub-race that we will talk about this evening. And the skills that she's developing right now will be essential for what we want her to do in a few incarnations. So you see, this is again, looking at life from a broader perspective can help you see the meaning in what otherwise seems to be meaningless. So certainly, we are all developing skills that can be placed or put to service in something that is very important for humanity. So take everything that comes to your life as being what the master sent you, because the master wants you to develop something in particular. I've seen it many times, like with myself. I say, oh, why do I have to do that? And then imagine the master appearing and telling you, I want you to do this. Will you do it? And you will say, sure, why not? Yeah, I will do it, and I will be happy doing it. What's the difference? The action is the same. It's just our frame of mind. So take everything that comes to your life as being sent by the master, which is true. I mean, if you study this subject, you will see that this is literally true. If you are earnest, the master is sending you, it's helping arrange your karma, so that things come to you, so that you are trained for what they need you to do. So you can take everything as coming from the master.
Okay, some comments from online, questions. Can you confirm which book the Annie Besant quotes came from? And they guessed it was Intro to Yoga. Is
yes,
that right?
There are from all over the place, but many of these come from Introduction to Yoga. That's a great book.
Okay.
Yes.
And we have a very lively discussion going on online, so this is a really engaged group.
Very good. Are
They
they discussing about the talk or something else?
Well, I will say that someone admires Ed for bringing forward dilemmas that we should puzzle through. So that was good. But no, it's about the topic.
So when I prepared a talk, I said, what would Ed ask, and how can I counteract his challenge?
They were working a lot on the earlier topic regarding unity versus individuality. And so there was a question that I thought was good. Isn't separation itself the true trigger for soul evolution?
Mm-hmm. So. Yes, absolutely. I mean, again, that's a very interesting point in the idea of evolution. Nothing is absolutely right, nothing is absolutely wrong. There are things that are needed for evolution at certain points. So, for example, the relationship of a parent with a toddler is what is needed at the time, and that is great. Now, as the toddler grows up and he becomes a teenager and he becomes a 20-something years old person, if the parents keep the same kind of relationship, then you say that's an unhealthy relationship. So in evolution, desire is necessary, separation is necessary, ambition is necessary, even violence is necessary at a certain point. So what you need to see is at what point humanity is right now, collectively, and what is necessary for humanity and what is not, because we don't let go of the past, which have the tendency to drag things into the new stage that now become an impediment. So when you understand at what stage humanity is right now, and then individually, at what stage of growth you are, then you can start discerning, okay, this that was great for me doesn't serve a purpose any longer. it's a stage that I have to move on. So yeah, separation is an important aspect of.
One of the things I struggle with, and I don't know if I'm speaking to others in the room, and maybe you're touching on that point now, is sometimes you want to, all that you've talked about of trying to take everybody with you, right, in your spiritual practice and see us all as connected. Sometimes you're in situations that are so toxic or dangerous, physically or mentally or spiritually, that you must simply separate yourself from these environments physically and almost put a wall up mentally because there's some danger coming into you from these situations. And is there a way, do you feel guilty about that? Are you enabling behavior if you don't do that? And then is there a way to put some kind of barrier up and then still maybe on another plane hope for these people wellness in another level, but that it cannot cause tremendous self-harm?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Something that both Blavatsky and Leadbeater, I remember reading from them, but all Theosophists would agree with that. But they both said, once Blavatsky was asked, what's the first requirement for the spiritual path? And she said, common sense. And what's the second? Common sense. And the third one is also common sense. And Leadbeater used to say, occultism is the apex of common sense. When you understand the laws, you understand the processes, they will always make sense. If something that comes from a true teaching doesn't make sense to you, it's because you are not really, you don't have enough information so that you understand it properly, or your understanding is not right. When you understand any occult principle properly, you say it makes perfect sense. So, if you are in a situation where you see that you cannot handle the situation without harm being produced, then it's perfectly fine to remove yourself or to take any measures that you need to take. Always, I think there is a Mahatma letter where the master says, we always have the right for, and he was talking about wars and in the context of countries, we always have the right for self-defense, not to attack the other, but to defend yourself. Of course, enlightened beings go beyond that. There is a point in which you go beyond defending yourself when you are strong enough. There is the story of Ramana Maharshi. He was another saint in India, or sage. And he had a few disciples in the temple. They are meditating or whatever. And then some robbers came in, and they started taking, whatever was there. And the disciples stood up to try to fight them. And Ramana Maharshi said, let them do whatever they are doing here. This is their dharma. So let them do whatever they do. When the robbers heard that, they thought that he was making fun of them. So they started kicking him. And he signaled the disciples, don't do anything. They broke his leg, I think, or arm or something like that. And then he made a joke, one of the religious ceremonies that they do is called puja, and puja also means beating. So he said, I was doing some puja, But evidently he understood this was a piece of karma that he had there. He really didn't care much about the body. Actually, he ended up dying of cancer. He didn't want to be treated for the cancer. He had cancer in the arm. The disciples insisted that he go through a surgery, so he said, okay, I'll go through a surgery, but I don't want any anesthesia. So he had the surgery just awake like that, and then later they asked, wasn't it painful? And he said, there was pain, but there was nobody to feel it. So you see, he could take on that beating, and he understood this is part of karma, I'll take it. So there are situations in which you may understand, and you may embrace it willingly and say, you know what, I'm going to go through this and use it as a spiritual development. But you have to gauge your strength. If you don't feel that you can do that healthily, then sure, retreat and continue working on yourself until next time you may be strong to face whatever is needed. And then besides that, if you practice meditation, there is a state of consciousness. If you can go deep enough, there is a state of consciousness in which you can even think of the people who are hurting you in some way or the other without any anger and with a sense of compassion. Now, that is not possible on our normal level of consciousness. But if in your practice of meditation you can go deep enough, you will discover that, look, I can think of this person that is, being nasty to me in some way or the other without having a sense of anger or hurt or something like that. If you can do that, then you can send love to the person. And again, this is where the Theosophical teachings can help you deal with this better. There is no evil in the souls. Even the soul of a person like Hitler, the typical evil guy, because there were many, I think, like him, but, Anyway, even the soul of a Hitler is a divine being. It's just that the souls, sometimes their personalities get out of control. They are taken over by the materialistic forces, the dark forces, and those souls are the first victims. The worst victim of any act of violence is the soul of that person. The soul never wants the personality to engage in something that is wrong. And then that soul, all the suffering that a person may cause on others is nothing compared to what the soul will have to pay. So if you think in that term, all the souls are your siblings, are part of your nature. They are all beautiful. They are all well intentioned. And when you see a soul that the personality is doing those things, you really feel the compassion and the love and trying to help the soul so that the soul can infuse in the personality some level of influence. So if you think about people from the point of view of the soul, it's far easier to send them your goodwill and say, how can I help?
My comment is sort of connected with your comment. I'm better with me feeling the pain, but when I see other people suffering, I can't handle that.
Yeah, welcome to the club. Yeah.
Oh, damn.
No. That's something that I think many, if not most of us, experience. At some point, for most of humanity, their personal pain is blinding. But when you start growing in this path, you realize, hey, I can handle my pain. But then the pain of the other becomes unbearable. And then that becomes our work. And yes, I can't tell you how to solve it because, I myself deal with that all the time and I do my best. But it is really the most challenging thing for us, yeah.
And just kind of want to piggyback on what she said and then what this lady said here as well. And speaking to your point, put it in the context of compassion, is that you have to also, in showing compassion for the other person, you must also think about compassion for yourself, right? If you think of it that way, right? That's not showing compassion to yourself by allowing other people to hurt you. And so specifically being born into a family of narcissists, I didn't even find that out until 4 years ago. I didn't even, I heard the word, but I had no idea what this was, okay, what I was in. And so going through that whole thing, I kept overgiving because I loved them, and I was conditioned to believe that that's what love is. You take it, and you showing up every time is showing unconditional love. However, what I failed at was showing myself that same unconditional love. We're not supposed to, and it is my belief, anyone can counter, I'm okay with that. But it's my belief that we're not supposed to sacrifice ourselves. Not of course, if you're trying to save someone's life, but it's not in the sense of I'm falling on a sword so you can be a narcissist to me and abuse me. The compassion also is for you to show yourself. And separation, that's the greatest compassion in a situation like that. You separate, but then spirituality also helps you to kind of see them and, like you said, understand that they too are divine, but they're lost.
Yeah.
So this will help you in that. But the first thing is to save yourself, I think, in those situations, because that can be detrimental and dangerous to your health, like dealing with people like that.
Again, there are all different stages, and we need to do what is common sense to us at the time. So there is a stage in which, yes, you have even to protect yourself, defend yourself, have love for yourself, separate from the situation, and that may be the right action there. Now, as you grow more and more strong, also you will start realizing that you need, because you feel strong, you need to protect less yourself, and you need to, your personality requires less and less and less, not because you are, there is an unhealthy way of forgetting about oneself, and there is a healthy way. The healthy way is when you don't need to think of yourself. And there are stages in which what another person would say self-sacrifice, for you is not self-sacrifice. But you are at a place where you don't need anything, because you are complete with the higher. So that is, you just offer because it's just coming out of you. So always give room to the perfect. None of us are the perfect final human product. The perfect final human product is beautiful, it's powerful, it's inspiring, it's so give yourself room to know that at some point that will be your reality. And then see, okay, what is the best that I can do now? I need to separate from this toxic relationship. I will do it while I continue to work on myself. And you don't know how in the next circumstances that may be similar in this life or in a future lifetime, you may be able to face it differently. We don't know. So yes, do what makes sense to you and give room to the idea that eventually you can be a savior of the world. Not us as personalities, but you as a soul. Jesus was crucified for everybody, and he said, okay, that's what I have to do, I'll take it. And many other people. So that power is within us, but not yet active, right? All right, let us move on then. There was another quote here, but it's, let us continue. So with this awareness, we start working on self-mastery. And Blavatsky says, whatever differences are to be found in the various presentations of the esoteric doctrine in different traditions from antiquity and now, whatever the differences, yet in every one of them we find the fullest agreement upon one point, the road to spiritual development. There are different ways of looking at the metaphysics of everything, but the road of spiritual development, Blavatsky says, they are all very similar in essence, in the different serious traditions. Only one inflexible rule has been ever binding upon the neophyte, and it is binding now. And the language he uses is always quite strong, so we can decode it. The complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher. So the word subjugation is a strong word, but in practice, that subjugation, that's why I prefer, some people use self-control. That also, the word control has negative connotations today. I think self-mastery is better reflective of what the situation is. But the idea is that the higher can control the lower, not by force, not by bullying the lower into submission, not by any kind of conflict. The higher controls the lower in a natural way. I give the example, suppose that there are children in first grade, they are all, laughing and yelling, and the teacher is not there. And then the teacher comes in, and when the children see the teacher, they all go quiet without the teacher saying something. I don't know if that happens today, that used to happen in the past. But the mere presence of the teacher made all the children quiet. when the higher nature begins to express itself in us, the lower nature goes quiet and follows the higher nature. So this self-mastery, this subjugation of the lower by the higher, is not an act of violence. Is that as we awaken the higher, the lower naturally aligns itself with the higher. Now that naturally comes later. There is a period of time where it's just like when you are training a pet. You know, your dog, let's say, is used to do certain things, and you need to train that pet. And at the beginning, it will be a struggle. Sit, and doesn't sit. Sit, doesn't sit. But eventually, you know, the dog learns and can behave, and you don't need to use violence for that. And when there is that training, then there is a natural relationship. And it can be a relationship of love. Your pet loves you, you love your pet. Something similar happens with our lower nature. For a while, there is still this clash of tendencies, but if you know how to do it in a loving way, eventually the lower nature aligns itself with the higher. Now, what Blavatsky is saying here is that there is no spiritual path, or no spiritual path can happen without this condition. This condition is there in any person that has some level of realization. So again, this is the ideal. In our case, we are still, in the struggle phase, most of us. But this is an ideal. We need to get to a point where, and at that point, it's not that your lower nature. There is a quote from the Mahatma letters where the master says, "We are not these kind of desiccated mummies with no feelings. We are human beings, and they have their feelings and all that. And they allow the feelings to be expressed, but they are in control. When they see that a feeling or something would not serve a purpose, they are able to let it go. And when something is necessary, they let the personality express that. So that's more or less what we aim at. You are sensitive, and when you see injustice, your emotional body will respond to that. But it will respond not in the overwhelming way that takes over your awareness. It responds in the way that is giving you information. It's telling you this is unfair. But then you have the freedom to how to respond. Whether you respond along with the feeling, if you think, okay, there is something that can be done that is right to do and that can have a good result, or if you see that it would make things worse, suppose an argument, and you see a person saying things that you think are ignorant. And sometimes opposing that person only inflames the whole situation and makes it worse. Or sometimes you see, this person can be receptive to a different point of view. Now, if you get angry about what the person is saying, you have no option. You are dragged by the anger to react, and whatever happens, happens. Self-mastery means you have the space and the freedom to say what's the best response to this situation. And sometimes it may be to say, I see it in this different way. And sometimes you may realize the best thing is not to engage. So the same with everything in life. But this self-mastery is necessary to develop in us. And part of this is what Leadbeater says here. We must realize that we are souls, eternal divine entities, that is our true nature, and not the bodies. You had in your physical life, you had a different body. It may have been a different gender than this body today. And that body had different qualities from the one that you have today. It may have been far healthier or less healthy, far more active or more lazy, whatever. The qualities of the body do not reflect who you are. It's just the karmic body that you need to continue your growth. Same with emotions. Maybe in this life you are very emotional. In your previous life you may have been a cold scientist, or the opposite. You are today very rational and you dislike emotions, and maybe you were very emotional in your previous life. But it's not you. It's the emotional body that you took. It's like a suit that you put on as a soul to experience life from this perspective. Obviously, the same with gender, race, social position. None of this is you. This is the avatar that you created to experience the world from this point of view, because this is what you need to learn as a soul. And same with your mind. So Leadbeater says we must realize that we are souls and not bodies. If we identify ourselves, as people usually do, with the physical vehicle, we cannot avoid giving altogether undue importance to what happens to the physical, to our bodies and to our physical situations. And we become, to a large extent, slaves to it and its perpetually changing feelings. We are in error when we say, I am angry, I am jealous. The true I, what you really are, is the self behind or within all these vehicles, and that self can never be angry or jealous or anything like that, though your astral body or emotional body may. So an essential part of self-mastery is to realize who you really are. And then the door opens to realize, okay, my emotional body is feeling in this way. Do I think that that's the correct response or not? But when you feel your emotions, there is no possibility. The same with your minds and prejudices. When you think you are your thoughts, then you are your conditioning, your bias, your prejudices. When you realize that this mind has been shaped by your culture, then you have room to question and say, wait a second, why is that thought there? Do I really agree with that thought? Or is it the product of the education that this personality had? In the Theosophical view, the purpose of meditation, the main purpose, is to help you realize your true nature. As we were saying, it's not to produce physical relaxation, although that happens, but that's a side effect. It's not your aim in meditation. It's not to produce good feelings, though that happens many times, but again, that's not your aim. It's just a side effect. It's not to develop psychic powers. The purpose of meditation is to help you realize your true nature in the Theosophical tradition. So how may the aspirant develop higher consciousness and intuition? The method, which has been taught throughout the ages, is that of meditation upon subjects which are normally beyond comprehension. So the idea is to put your mind in the spiritual, that which is beyond the material, as we were discussing in this question of when we are talking at the level of the mind, we have to bring all that is spiritual within the realm of what the words, the physical words can convey, and physical words were created to describe the physical plane. It is in meditation where you try to go beyond the mind. And then as your consciousness learns to dwell beyond the mind, then you start understanding these metaphors that the teachings bring, and you understand the spiritual intent behind descriptions that obviously are used, using the physical words. So the mind can be deliberately trained and developed along certain lines by forcing it to dwell. And again, if you don't like forcing it, what he means is that, as you all know, your mind will tend to wander. You say, okay, let me think of this that I really like. And you sit and you try to contemplate that, and then you see that your mind wants to do something else. You have to learn how to deal with that so that eventually you get to the point of self-mastery where you can focus on something that you choose for indefinite time. And there are techniques. There are a lot of techniques that we cannot go into them. I'm just showing you the principles. But has to be trained and developed along certain lines by focusing it, let's say, upon concepts and expressions of universal principles. Meditation upon such sublime ideas lifts the aspirant out of the personal consciousness, where he touches for a moment that part of himself which is divine. And there are many techniques to do this, not just thinking about something. So let me go to the last point and then we'll close, which is service. So service is also an integral part of the Theosophical tradition. And Besant says, there are those who do often very little prayer. She was talking about all these people working on meditation and praying and all that. But Besant says, sure, that's part of the spiritual path. However, she says, there are those who do often very little prayer and very little of meditation, but who have forgotten themselves in service. Those who go onwards and reach the feet of the Master. And that is the lesson that all of you must learn. Do not ask, am I making progress? Ask yourself every night, what have I done for others today? Because the purpose of meditation is that you are a better server. The purpose of study is that you are a better server. The purpose of having self-mastery and purifying your nature is that you are a better server. So, of course, we need to engage in all these practices as best as you can. But again, why? Because you want to evolve? No. Because only then you can serve better. And serving others, you are serving yourself too. So Leadbeater says, and with this we are going to finish, as a person starts going into the spiritual practice, you see this a lot of times, that people start practicing, whether meditation or chanting or something like that, and many people soon get bored and say, what else? And then they start switching from tradition to tradition, teacher to teacher, many times unending, shopping of different techniques and things like that. So Leadbeater says, after a person starts practicing, then he begins to ask himself the question, what must I do next? And the answer is work. Do what you can to help the progress of humanity in the Master's way. Begin with what you have the opportunity to do in your daily life, whether it may seem large or small. Begin with what you have the opportunity to do and what you can do, which may be any little external thing at first. And presently, as you acquire the necessary qualities of character, you will be drawn into the higher side of service. So service is the flower of the yoga of Theosophy.